Okay, let's unpack this. You've probably seen the headlines, right?
Hmm.
The whole world of reality TV fame sort of colliding head-on with the justice system. It's a story that's certainly caught a lot of attention, and it's all about this recent news, the pardon of Todd and Julie Chrisley, the reality TV stars, by President Trump.
Right.
That's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing, but it's a great thing because your parents are going to be free and clean, and I hope we can do it by tomorrow. Is that okay? We'll try getting it done tomorrow. So
wonderful.
give them, I don't know them, but give them my regards and wish them a good life.
Mr. President,
Yes. How are
I just
you?
want to say thank you for bringing my parents back.
I'm just so grateful that I'm gonna leave here with my dad. My brother Grayson is there to pick up my mom, so he's waiting. President Trump signed the pardons, I think at around 3 p.m. this afternoon. And it's all due to President Trump, Alice Johnson, Ed Martin, all of them. They have truly just shown up and they've looked at this case with a fine-tooth comb and they've seen the corruption. I was walking into the grocery store when I got the call from the president, and I was just in such shock and in such awe that the president himself called me and took the time to let me know that my family was coming back together. And this doesn't just stop with my family. I'm going to get my parents home and I will be back in DC, and I will continue to fight for these men and women and reforms, and especially for women in the system.
We're going to explore, who they are, what actually brought them into the legal spotlight in the first place, the specific details of their conviction, the sentencing that's all laid out in the material, and of course, the circumstances around this presidential pardon that just happened today.
That's right. And the documents you provided, they cover quite a bit. We can trace their public presence, through their show, Chrisley Knows Best.
Yeah, that was huge.
Which was known for showcasing what really looked like a very, very lavish lifestyle. But then we shift gears into the legal side, their indictment and the, pretty serious federal charges they ended up facing.
And those charges mentioned in the material, they are significant. We're talking things like tax evasion, wire fraud, conspiracy, orchestrating a multi-million-dollar bank fraud scheme, and submitting false documents, basically to get loans and, avoid taxes.
Exactly.
And the material confirms they were convicted on these charges back in 2022. It also details their original sentences. Todd got, 12 years?
12 years, yeah, and Julie got 7. Although, it does also note that those sentences were reduced later on.
Right. Reduced, but still substantial.
So our goal here really is to pull out the most important facts and insights from all this. We want to give you a clear understanding of this whole event. A really high-profile federal conviction, followed by a presidential pardon, drawing directly from the material you've given us.
And there are some fascinating contrasts presented in that material, aren't there? You see their public image, the sort of perfect family ideal, set against the really serious nature of the charges. And you also get their perspective laid out, which is that this whole prosecution, they felt, was politically motivated.
Exactly. And the material really highlights their daughter, Savannah Chrisley's very, very outspoken advocacy. I mean, she's been fighting for years.
She really has.
And you see these moments described, like her speaking at the RNC, as the Republican National Committee.
Right.
Where she was very critical of the Department of Justice, the DOJ. Called it broken, I think.
Yeah, broken. And she even read out her parents' prison identification numbers.
Wow.
Said they weren't just statistics, they were her whole heart. It's quite powerful language described there.
It really is.
And the documents even apparently include excerpts from President Trump's phone call with Savannah, the one where he actually told her about the pardon.
Yeah, that's in there too. So it gives you a kind of direct glimpse into that really pivotal moment and, his view on it all.
Okay, so let's dive into some of those specifics laid out in the material. The Chrisleys, they certainly gained significant fame, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Chrisley Knows Best, it debuted back in 2014, I believe.
Right.
And it built up a really large audience showcasing their lifestyle.
But the material shows that public image took a pretty drastic turn with their indictment in 2019 on multiple federal charges.
And the core of it, as it's detailed in the sources, really centered around this multi-million-dollar bank fraud scheme.
Okay.
The material specifies they conspired to defraud banks for over $30 million. They did this using fraudulent loans, submitting false documents, both to get the loans in the first place and also to, avoid paying their taxes.
So that's what the wire fraud and bank fraud charges as described in the material actually mean. Using emails, banks, that sort of thing. Essentially, using electronic communications or the banking system itself to, well, carry out deception for financial gain. That's the gist of it from the sources.
Got it. And that leads us to the trial. The material confirms that in 2022, both Todd and Julie were convicted on these federal charges.
Yep. And following that conviction, their initial sentences were pretty substantial. Like you said, Todd received 12 years in prison, Julie 7 years. The material does note these were later reduced on appeal, but they did start serving time back in 2022.
Okay. Now, it seems really crucial to look at how the material presents the Chrisleys' own view on this whole situation.
Definitely.
They've consistently maintained, according to the sources, that the prosecution was politically motivated.
Right. And their daughter, Savannah, as we mentioned, has been a very vocal advocate, really echoing that view.
Yeah.
The material describes her speaking out quite a bit, including at the RNC, stating her belief that they were targeted, for political reasons and that the outcome just wasn't fair, wasn't just. But here's where the material seems to offer a counterpoint, or at least another perspective. One part quotes someone described as having worked on the case,
Okay.
saying, effectively, that it wasn't about politics at all. The perspective offered there was simply that they committed a crime and, well, that's why they were sentenced. Pretty straightforwardly put.
Right. So that really highlights a fundamental tension in the narrative presented in the material, doesn't it? These differing explanations for why this legal outcome actually happened.
Exactly.
However, one source does kind of make the point that, whether the prosecution felt political to the Chrisleys or not, it resulted in a federal conviction, a legitimate conviction in the eyes of the law at that point. And that's the status, the legal reality that allows for the action taken today, the pardon.
Which brings us right up to today's big news. President Trump has pardoned Todd and Julie Chrisley. That's confirmed in the material we reviewed, meaning they are now free. And the material describes how this news was actually delivered through that phone call President Trump made directly to their daughter, Savannah.
Yeah, and we even get some excerpts from that call quoted in the material.
What did they say?
Well, President Trump apparently told Savannah something like, it's a great thing, and that her parents are going to be free and clean.
Wow. Free and clean.
Yeah. He wished them a good life, mentioned hearing they received pretty harsh treatment in prison, said he heard they are terrific people, and stated that what happened should not have happened. He also apparently congratulated Savannah and her brother for fighting for this release.
And that fight, it is detailed, especially Savannah's efforts over the years. Beyond that RNC speech where she called the DOJ broken,
Right.
the material points out again, she specifically read her parents' prison identification numbers right there at the convention, calling them her whole heart.
Yeah, that moment stood out in the reporting. And the material also mentions she was pretty outspoken for several years about what she described as inhumane treatment her parents experienced while they were incarcerated.
So, okay, bringing it all together from the material. What does this whole arc look like? You have the reality TV fame built on this really lavish image that leads into a very serious federal conviction for major financial crimes, things like conspiring to defraud banks of millions.
Numbers, yeah.
Then you have this determined family fight, claiming injustice, claiming politically motivated prosecution.
Right, that whole narrative.
Culminating today in a presidential pardon, which leads to their immediate release from federal prison. Quite a trajectory.
It really is. If we look at the bigger picture presented in the material, this story is, well, it's noteworthy for a few reasons, isn't it? It brings together celebrity culture, a significant federal conviction for serious white-collar crimes, very public, outspoken family advocacy claiming wrongful targeting, and then the direct exercise of presidential pardon power. It's definitely a complex situation. And the material really does provide these multiple angles on what transpired.
So let's consider those different perspectives one last time, just based on the material we have. You have Todd, Julie, and Savannah, who, according to the sources, genuinely believe they were targeted politically, that the outcome was unjust.
That's their presented viewpoint.
And that's contrasted pretty sharply with the implication from others involved in the case, as presented in these sources, that, well, they were sentenced because they simply committed a crime.
A very different framing.
Yeah, the material clearly shows that difference in how the prosecution and the conviction are viewed by those directly involved in their supporters versus maybe those who handled the legal side of the case.
Definitely a divergence there.
So it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? What does the power of a presidential pardon actually mean in the context of these really sharply differing views on justice, on the legal process itself, all as it's laid out only in this material we've been discussing? Makes you wonder,